In this video, we will discuss migrating virtual machines. In this section, we will discuss vMotion and storage vMotion. Here's the situation. We have many virtual machines running on one ESXi host. And we have found that the host is overloaded. We just have too many virtual machines running on it. So what we can do is we can move some of those virtual machines to a less busy host. But the problem with that is by shutting down a virtual machine and then moving it to another ESXi host is going to break the user's connections. So what we do is we use vMotion. vMotion allows us to move a virtual machine from one ESXi host to another. It allows us to move a running virtual machine from one ESXi host to the other, and that way the users are not disconnected. A big advantage: you don't have to shut down the virtual machine and then move it to the other ESXi host. The big advantage of vMotion is that it moves a running virtual machine from one ESXi host to the other, and the users are not disconnected. They don't even know that the virtual machine has moved from one host to the other. To perform a vMotion, I will select this virtual machine right here. It's called Database Server, and you can see it's on ESXi host ending in .10, and I want to move it to the ESXi host that's ending in .11. So theoretically, this server is overburdened, and I want to move it to this server. So I right-click on my database server, and I select Migrate. And then when I select Migrate, I can either change the host, change the data store, or change both host and data store. In this example, what I want to do is to change the ESXi host that the virtual machine is running on. Click on Next. Then I select the host that I want to move it to, which is .11, followed by Next. It says that is where it will move it to. Click on Finish, and you can see under Active Tasks it is in the process of relocating the virtual machine. And there it goes. It just moved from one ESXi host to the other. vMotion allows us to move a running virtual machine from one ESXi host to another. Exposing or hiding the NX/XD parameter. This stands for no execute or execute disable. These are parameters which are configured on the BIOS and which configure the CPU. So if the CPUs on ESXi hosts are not identical, we want them to appear to be identical to the virtual machines. And the way we do that is by hiding the NXDX feature. So here's what we do. I go to my database, my virtual machine, and I select Edit Settings, and under Options on what's called CPU Identifier Mask, CPU Identification Mask, hiding the NX/XD flag, that's no execute disable, execute disable flag, will increase vMotion compatibility between hosts at the cost of disabling certain CPU performance features. So what we're doing is we are lowering the performance of all CPUs to match the performance of the lowest CPU, so they will all be compatible, so we can do vMotion. So this would be called hiding the NX/XD flag. If we look on the help screen for that, we will see in the CPU identification mask, we select an NX flag function. And the description shows that hiding the NX flag function will increase vMotion compatibility. Hiding the NX flag increases vMotion compatibility between hosts, but might disable certain CPU features. vMotion requirements map. The reason we use the vMotion requirements map is to identify problems before they happen. We use the requirements map to see whether or not the hardware and the setup and the network infrastructure will be compatible with vMotion. So what I do is I select my data center and I click on map, and now what we see is a map to show the compatibility of vMotion, and we see two error messages here related to these ESXi hosts. So if I click on the error message, I see that one error message says unable to access the file on the data store, and the other error message says virtual hard disk is not accessible on the data store. So this implies either there is a problem with the storage area network, or a problem with the data store, or a problem with the path to the data store. So I would have to resolve these problems before I could implement the vMotion. Now let's talk about storage vMotion. Whereas vMotion moves a running virtual machine from one ESXi host to the other, and thus we are moving the VMX file, the virtual machine configuration file, storage vMotion moves the virtual hard disk to a different data store, a different disk array, and what's being moved there is the VMDK file, the virtual hard disk file. Storage motion allows us to move the virtual hard disk file from one disk array to another. Why would we want to do that? Well, perhaps we are doing maintenance on this disk array, and we want to have the virtual machine to continue to be available to the users, so then we will move it to the other disk array. Or we might do it because we're running out of space on this disk array and we have more space on this disk array. Storage vMotion allows us to move a virtual hard disk to a different data store while the machine is still running, so the users are not disconnected. To perform a storage vMotion, I select the virtual machine that I want to move, and I right click and I select migrate. And then I don't select change host, I select change data store. I click finish. I select the virtual machine that has the data store that I want to access. What we are assuming, in this case, this is direct attached storage, followed by next, and I select the name of the data store where I want it to be moved to, and I click on finish, next, followed by finish, and now the data store has been moved. The virtual hard disk has been moved from one data store to the other. So vMotion allows us to move the running virtual machine from one ESXi host to the other. Storage vMotion allows us to move the virtual hard disk from one data store to the other. We could do just vMotion or storage vMotion, or we could do both. To move both, all we have to do is select the lower radio button that says change both the host and the data store. So sometimes you only want to do one, sometimes you just want to do the other, and sometimes you want to do both. The reason you would change host is because one host doesn't have enough processing power, not enough CPUs or RAM, so you move it to the other host. The reason you might change the data store is because one data store is running out of space and you want to move it to a data store which has plenty of free space, or you might want to change both host and data store. vMotion, storage vMotion. vMotion moves the running virtual machine from one ESXi host to the other. Storage vMotion moves the virtual hard disk from one disk array to the other. In summary, vMotion allows us to move a virtual machine from one ESXi host to the other. Storage vMotion allows us to move the virtual hard disk from one data store to the other while the virtual machine is still running. And this concludes our video on migration.